So now we've replaced our Drupal 6 files with our Drupal 7 files, preserving our sites directory exactly the way we had it on the Drupal 6 site, but changing everything else. If we had made any modifications to our old .htaccess or robots.txt files, we've reapplied those directives to the new version of robots.txt or .htaccess. Now it's time to move on to step 13 in Drupal 7's upgrade.txt file. We need to make the settings.php file writable. This way, when we install Drupal 7 and it sees the old version of settings.php, it's able to alter the file to work properly with Drupal 7. As a reminder, our settings.php file, and it tells you right here, is in our sites directory, default, right here, settings.php. Normally there will also be a default.settings.php file here, but one of the steps was that we needed to remove that file for the upgrade. Now, there are a number of ways to change file permissions on a server. If you're using cPanel, there should be options in your file manager to change the permissions. If you're using the command line, it's very easy to change permissions. If you're using your own file system, you can usually change permissions in a limited way, but not so limited that you can't handle simply adding write permissions. Now, another caveat here is that servers can be set up different ways so that different types of users need to have the write permissions in order for Drupal to be able to write to the settings.php file. So there's no one proper way to do this. If we go here, and I'm going to right click on settings.php and get the info. In Mac OS X, if we scroll down, we can change privileges here from read and write to read only. Although there are more options if you're using the command line or even cPanel. Most of the time, you just need to give the owner of the file, which would be this user, read and write permissions. In my specific case, I have to give basically everyone the write permissions in order to change the file. But that's alright because as soon as we change the file, we're going to go back and change the permissions so that not just anyone can edit the file. If you're using the command line, we can go to the directory on our system, sites, default, and then if we type this command, ls-l, we get a list of everything that's in the default directory and the permissions. A quick crash course on permissions here. These first 3 dashes are for the owner of the file, the second 3 dashes are for the group that owns the file, and the last 3 dashes here are for anybody. Currently, the owner, the group, and everybody just has read permissions. There are a number of ways you can change the write permissions here. I'm going to do this by using sudo chmod all, represented by a, plus means add w write permissions to settings.php. And it's going to ask me for my password. And now I've made the change. And we can see that now this owner, the group, and everyone can write to settings.php. In many cases, you only will have to give the owner of the file write permissions. To do that, as you might guess, you would change the A for all to O for owner. So it would look like this: sudo chmod o plus w settings.php. I'm not going to run that, but that's what it'll look like for a lot of people. If you get really lost on this and just cannot get it to work, there's a quick and easy way to give everybody all permissions. That would be to write sudo chmod 777 settings.php. That's a little bit dangerous, but since we're going to be reverting our changes, it's okay to have this temporarily just to make it work. Just make sure you notice what your permissions were originally, because you'll need to go back to those permissions for it to work properly after Drupal has made the change. If you're using cPanel, there are some simple checkboxes you can use to say, I want to give this file 777 permissions. You can also make these changes in FTP clients, such as FileZilla or whatever FTP client you like to use. Really, for the most part though, permissions are a bit out of the scope of this tutorial. There is a page on Drupal.org that extensively covers permission settings in Drupal. That page can be found at drupal.org/node/244924. Securing file permissions and ownership. If you want more information on file permissions, which really is an important topic, this page has a lot of information on file permissions in general, as well as file permissions practices for Drupal sites. So now back to the upgrade process. We've applied the proper write permissions to our settings.php file. Once we've done that, it's time to run Update.php. To do this, as the directions explain, we're going to navigate to our site's domain /update.php. Notice, if we go to our root domain as if we were just navigating to our site, Drupal takes us to the install.php page. What we need is update.php. And if you have not applied the proper write permissions to your settings.php file, you will get an alert about that. So it'll let you know that something's wrong and you need to still fix the permissions there. If you've not done so already, it won't allow you to continue and mess anything up. So you don't have to worry about that. Notice the first step here is to back up your database. We would do that right now for the second time, I believe, in this tutorial so far. You'd also back up your code, in other words, back up all of your files. Put your site into maintenance mode, which we've already done. And then we'll install the new files. We've already placed the files in the directory, so that's not something we have to worry about. If you are unable to access this page, this might happen especially in cases where you were not logged in as user 1. There is a solution to that. If we consult the update.txt file, if you're unable to access update.php, do the following. Open settings.php, find this line that says update free access equals false, and change it to true. Let's take a look at that real quick so you can see what it looks like in the file. Here's my settings.php file. I'm going to open this. Here are the contents of the file. If we scroll down just a little bit, we see right here, for me it's on line 123. It'll probably be the same or similar for most of you. Update free access. We would simply edit this and change false to true if we had trouble accessing this page. In other words, if we typed in our domain /update.php and it gave us an error or a warning or told us that we weren't allowed to access this page or this file, that's when we would go here and change update free access to true. But it worked for me, so I'm going to keep it as false. If you do change it to true, then you just need to make sure that once you've completed the update process, you go back to your settings file and change it back to false. So everything's ready. We're going to click continue. The version of Drupal you are updating from has been automatically detected. That's good news. There are 145 pending updates. We could look at all these, but it's not really important. All that's important is that Drupal knows how to handle it, which it does. So we're going to tell it to apply the pending updates. And we see a few notes related to time zone options. Not really a big deal there. It tells us that a plain text format will be available to all users as far as uploading content goes. That's just fine. It says updates were attempted. If you see no failures below, you may proceed happily back to your site. So we're going to look here. This is simply an update. This tells us what all happened that we need to know about. The following updates returned messages. These are not necessarily failures. In fact, none of these are failures. It's just telling us things that the modules or other aspects of the Drupal site would like us to know happened following running Update.php. You can see that all these are either good or innocuous things. Passwords have been rehashed to improve security, time zones were migrated, etc., etc. The important thing is that we see no failure messages. Now, let's go check out our site and see if it looks somewhat reasonable. Keep your fingers crossed, click on site. This actually looks pretty good, doesn't it? If we go to Administration under the Management menu, let's go to our Reports menu. Let's check out our status report. We see that we've successfully upgraded to Drupal 7.34. We still have some work to do on our modules, but the Drupal site itself is now version 7, which is awesome. You may see a couple errors here, which are easy fixes. This is the configuration file. Settings.php, since it's writable by everyone, that's a security risk. So we'll go back and change that to the original permissions it has. In fact, I'll go ahead and do that right now. Originally, this file was all simply readable. It was readable by everyone, but there were no writable or executable permissions. We can go back and make this readable by everyone by typing sudo chmod. I would prefer to use all minus writable. Nobody can write to it. Tell it what file you want to apply that change to. That's of course settings.php. And it may ask you for your password again. And that's just fine. If we type in ls-l now, we see that the W's, which stand for writable, are all gone from our settings.php file. There's one more error here. The directory sites default files is not writable. You may not see this. This is going to depend a lot on how your site was originally set up with Drupal 6. If you're using a file system or cPanel, once again, this is in sites, default files. If we go to get info, for me, I need to make sure that everybody can write to it. But again, this is a server-specific situation. You need to find out what works specifically for your server settings. And the command line way to do this would be to simply find your files directory and do sudo chmod, for instance, a+w on files, or for some people it may just be owner plus w. Again, it all depends on your server. Now that I've made that change in the files directory, and I've fixed this on settings.php, we're going to go ahead and refresh this page, and everything looks good. This is a minor warning that I'm getting for my own server settings. That's not anything you have to worry about. Everything else is working exactly as it should. So now, even though we haven't gotten our modules working yet, we have completed the upgrade process of Drupal core. We're not running Drupal 6 anymore. We are now running Drupal 7. Our settings.php file has been updated during the process, and our database has been updated during the process. The next step will be to get all of our modules back working once again.